welcome to Design Thinking for Educators. This is one of our several introductory webinars to design thinking in education. So we'll run through a couple different design methods today. We'll talk about what design thinking is and what it can possibly do to support you in your system. So this is our design thinking team here at the Consortium for Public Education. I'm Aaron Aldemus. I'm joined here by Sarah Brooks today, and our third partner, Debbie Pixton, couldn't join us today, but she is one of our training partners in human-centered design. So we are program directors with the Consortium for Public Education. We are a small nonprofit based out of McKeesport, PA, just outside the city of Pittsburgh, and our focus is on future readiness. And when we talk about future ready, we frame it in terms of three questions. Who am I? Who do I want to be? And how do I get there? We feel those are questions that students at any age, with any experience can engage with, start to engage with, thinking about their interests, their passions, who they want to be as they get older. You'll notice not what do I want to do, but who do I want to be as a human, right? So that focuses all of our work, whether it's design thinking, project-based learning, service learning, mentoring, even educator-focused programming, all center around those three questions of future readiness. Now, Sarah and I are certified trainers and facilitators of human-centered design through the Luma Institute. If anyone is familiar, Luma is an international design firm based in the city of Pittsburgh. And a couple of years ago, they worked with the Grable Foundation to expand and take design thinking and human-centered design into the education space. And Sarah and I were lucky enough to be a part of that initiative. And so we got to train educators from 21 different school districts here in Western PA and help them to apply design thinking to their systems in a lot of different ways. And beyond that, we've used human-centered design with districts to do project-based learning needs assessments. We worked with one district actually to use human-centered design for a district building realignment, figuring out which students should go where and looking at neighborhoods and the needs of all the stakeholders in that district, as well as using human-centered design to tailor and improve communication between districts and all of their stakeholders. It's a very versatile set of tools, and we'll talk a little bit more about how you can use design for your system. So we're going to define design thinking and talk a little bit about the basics today. We only have an hour, so we're going to try to cover a lot, and hopefully you'll walk away with some specific tools as well that you can use, even if you don't dive any deeper into design thinking. We'll talk about how you can use design to support your class, your system, your stakeholders, and we'll talk a little bit at the very end just about if you are interested and you want to learn more. We do have a training coming up in June that you can join as well. So here are the design thinking basics. When we talk about design thinking, it's really a mindset, and it's a human-centered approach to innovation. That comes from probably the most renowned design firm, IDEO. And when they talk about mindset, they're not lying. It goes way beyond, a set of tools even. It changed the way I think, and I was a former secondary social studies and English teacher and an after school program director. And I really wish I would have had the designer's mindset when I was teaching, because it really changed the way I think about any challenge that I come up against. To think about opportunities, to have an asset-based mindset, to have a beginner's mindset, to ask lots of questions and try things and test them out and share them with people and get feedback. Like it's a whole way of looking at your world. And I think in education, it's indispensable. So the design cycle, we're going to cover just very briefly. But traditionally, if you're learning about human-centered design or design thinking, design cycle has 5 components. The first one is empathize. So making sure you understand the interests, the challenges, what motivates your students, your users, your stakeholders, parents, families, whoever it might be, but really putting yourself in their shoes. When you're trying to solve a problem, the first thing is to really understand the people you're trying to solve the problem for, who you're working with, where they're coming from. Then you synthesize as much information as you can. Maybe you do some research, you're talking to folks, and you really define the challenge that you're facing. Really get to know it well, right? And then you go broad and you ideate. So you come up with lots of different solutions to whatever the challenge is. You prototype. So you draft something, you build out a new program, you write a new lesson plan, whatever it might be. And then you test it, right? You see what happens, see if it works, right? And then you get your feedback and you adjust and you go through the cycle again. It goes round and round and round. But it's a cycle of improvement over and over. That's really the way the design cycle works. So design thinking can be done using a variety of methods or strategies. We're going to cover kind of the greatest hits today, some of our favorites. And different design methods fit into different phases of the design cycle. Some are going to be specific tools for specific situations. However, some methods can be used in more than one phase of design. Some are very flexible. You can use in a lot of different situations. And just as an example, so we'll cover some of these methods today. We're not going to get to all of them, but we do have a bunch of short explainer videos that do cover a lot of these that you could check out on your own, but they all can fall into different categories. For instance, in that empathize phase, using interviewing, talking to folks and learning about their current situation, really getting into their perspective. That's certainly a specific empathize kind of method. Whereas something like Rose, Thorn, Bud, which we'll talk about a little later today, can be used in the testing phase. You could use it in the defined phase. It's a great way to figure out where the problems are. Some of them are a little more flexible. Yeah, so methods can work on their own, or they can be put together as a set. Now, at the end of the webinar today, Sarah's going to talk a little bit about some of the ways that districts have taken design methods and really put them into a complete set to go from that empathize phase all the way to prototyping, testing, and refining their ideas, how you can really put these together into action. And so when we talk about design, we often talk about divergent and convergent thinking. So divergent thinking is going broad. It's coming up with lots and lots of ideas, right? And convergent thinking is narrowing down, right? So in the terms of the design cycle, it looks like this. So when we're empathizing, first thing you're going to do, you're going to go wide, right? You want to cast a wide net, learn as much as you can about your stakeholders, get as much information, as much data, as much research as you can. And then you converge. You take all that information, you synthesize it, and you try to define that problem. You try to nail it down, get something specific, right? Define the problem. Once you know your problem, you go broad again, come up with a bunch of ideas, right? Figure out which ideas are going to work best for you. You determine your best solutions and you converge again, right? You get a couple ideas. You're like, all right, we're going to test these out. All right, great. Design a couple potential concepts, whatever it might be. Create a couple different outlines for programs, a couple different curricular ideas, whatever it might be. And then as you test them out, you figure out which ones work, which ones don't. You put some on the shelf, you take some into scale. That's kind of the way that works. Going broad, narrowing down, back and forth, convergent, divergent, over and over again. And you start back at the beginning again as you go. So when we talk about human-centered design, it's a form of design thinking, but not always. It's kind of design thinking is kind of the umbrella. Human-centered design falls underneath. But it's a type of design thinking that focuses on empathy specifically as a means of creative problem solving. It really puts people at the center. You're developing solutions in the service of people. And as educators, it's what we do like every day, right? Every single day, no matter what your role is in the education system, you are working with humans and you're trying to help them, whatever it might be, whether it's with families or students or working with other teachers or your counselor, like you're always putting people at the center of your work, right? So human-centered design is a key component of education, right? And so if you know your stakeholders well, if you know your students, your staff, your families, the education you provide is going to be more, it's going to be better aligned to their interests, their needs. You're going to meet folks where they're at. That's really the goal with human-centered design. And this is if anyone's ever seen Apollo 13, this is maybe one of my favorite examples just to get to the heart of like how human-centered design can work, how design works. Sarah, can you unmute?
Growing with the carbon dioxide.
We had a CO2 filter problem on the limb module.
5 filters on the limb, which are meant for 2 guys for a day and a half. So I told the doctor,
They're already up to 8 on the gauges. Anything over 15 and you get impaired judgment, blackouts, the beginnings of brain asphyxia.
What about the scrubbers on the command module?
they take square cartridges. The ones on the limb are round.
Tell me this isn't a government operation.
It just isn't a contingency we can remotely look at.
Those CO2 levels are going to be getting toxic.
Well, I suggest you gentlemen invent a way to put a square peg in a round hole.
Hey, people, listen up. There's handed us this one, and we gotta come through. We gotta find a way to make this fit into the hole for this. Using nothing but that. Let's get it organized.
Okay, let's build the filter.
Get some coffee.
CO2 gas is literally poisoning the astronauts with every breath in and out.
Heads up, heads up. People, look out now. What's this? That's what they gotta make.
Well, you got the procedures for me.
Right here.
That's it?
So that's kind of design in a nutshell, right? We spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to put square pegs in round holes. And as educators, we're all in that Ed Harris situation quite a bit, right? You know, trying to make it work. You know, you don't always have all the information you need. You don't always have the resources you need. But we're constantly doing what Zaretta Hammond calls Apollo 13ing it, right? You're working with the tools you have. You know, and that's part of design. Sometimes you got to work, you often have to work within constraints. And then that happens, I think, unfortunately, more in education than maybe any other field. You know? So Sarah is going to talk a little more in depth about how design thinking and education meld together.
Thanks, Aaron. Okay. So, well, design thinking does help with education. It can help you do your everyday job. There are many, many challenges faced by educators. And when we say educators, what we refer to as anybody that works within the school system, right? Because anybody that's there in a school system is there for the kids. So you've got everything from, you know, just finding a personal work-life balance to, you know, student behavior and engagement. Like that's been really tough this year. The last 2 years of the pandemic has been rough and it's affecting our kids greatly. Trying to, you know, with that, trying to meet the students' mental and physical health needs, trying to retain your staff, right? Everybody's tired and it's been rough out there. On top of that, also trying to keep our families engaged, right? We work with districts that are right now coming up with approaches and trying to engage families. They see value in bringing families in, and, you know, how do you do that? Because every community is different. And least of all, like trying to manage and teach in schools during a global pandemic, like it's been tough. So the thing about all of these challenges and also all the other challenges that we don't have time to go through all of them is that they are all human centered, right? So if we can use these designs to try and solve for humans, it can be very impactful. So not all design thinking strategies, Aaron, I don't know, there's like hundreds of them, and some of them are much more specific to education and translate better to education than others. So again, as Aaron said, we have our greatest hits right here. Not only these, but they are some of the more impactful, easier ones to implement. So when we're talking about designing an approach to human-centered problems, there's kind of steps, right? So Aaron had talked about the design cycle, and really it starts with knowing and being able to empathize with your stakeholders. Then from there, being able to understand and define like what these problems are that they are bringing to you. Then, well, we need to brainstorm our solutions, right? But brainstorming can be very difficult for folks. So often, as I know a kid, we were given like blank sheets of paper and it was, hey, brainstorm. Like that, brainstorm what? So trying to teach our kids, like there are structures in place. And not just with our students, but, with staff members, we're implementing a new curriculum or we need a new curriculum. What does that look like? Being able to brainstorm together as a group is really important, and having structures set in place that make that brainstorming that much more impactful and more focused is also what certain human-centered design strategies are able to do. Once we've brainstormed, we're going to go out and we're going to look for inspiration, right? Like other people are going to be solving this problem. What are they doing? How can we be inspired by other problem solving solutions? And then, building consensus as a team, and then presenting this to your stakeholders and going, okay, this is what we got. Give us some feedback, right? Because, hey, guess what? Now we're going to go back and we're going to start this whole process over again. And we're going to refine this solution that we think will help, right? So in order to break down some of these steps per strategy, we're going to kind of go by this step by step. So being able to know and empathize with your stakeholders. Your stakeholders are essentially those people that once something's been implemented, if you don't talk to them, they're the ones that are going, hold on, nobody asked me my opinion. That's a stakeholder, right? Anybody who has any opinion in whatever it is that you're trying to do, they have some knowledge. So it is important to be able to identify who those folks are. So who is involved in a system or a community that's going to care about the solution to this problem that you are trying to solve? Being able to identify those folks is going to help determine, which individuals essentially need to be at the table, who we need to talk to. Because if we do not talk with those folks and gather their input, we could make assumptions and we could be ignoring some really important information that we just might not be aware of. Because if we do this and we ignore a stakeholder, then we might end up solving a problem with incomplete or really biased information. So we've used this in terms of, Aaron said when we were, we've done human-centered design with educators. This can be done, in different places within a school. It can be done with a community. And one of those strategies is called stakeholder mapping, which is essentially who are all of our stakeholders? How do they kind of group together? And how do these groups of people interact with each other?
So stakeholder mapping, can be used at, the administrative level, but in the classroom, it can really be handy as a thinking routine for students. When you're organizing historical figures within an event, or if you're doing project-based learning, you're asking students to think about folks in their community they might want to connect with. It's a great way to really stop, pump the brakes, and think about all the people who might be involved in something and what their relationships are, how they all fit together. So the next piece is, I'll call it advice, I think. Avoid assumptions, go and see, empathize with people, right? And this can take many different forms. We talk about observations. I think we're all familiar with observations in kind of the classic sense of in education, right? Admins coming in and observing classrooms, but observation in design thinking is really an ethnographic kind of research. It's very intentional about taking time out to learn about the folks you're working with. So it involves a lot of looking and listening to build understanding, to build that empathy, provides insights into others' experiences and actions. So for teachers, I think observing is a great thing to do, to go into someone else's classroom and learn and see how someone else is doing instruction. It can be great to go in another space and observe your own students and see how they interact in a space outside of your own classroom. For administrators to really use observation as a different kind of tool, something that's not necessarily an evaluative tool, but something just to learn about the folks you're working with, your colleagues, right? And if you're going into a space and you have the ability to ask questions, we often use magic phrases. We call them magic phrases. Tell me more about, or if you had a magic wand, what would this look like, right? So if you're, working on a new program or a new course, in a perfect world, what would this career readiness course look like, right? You can really draw out information from folks by using some phrases to open up their thinking. And the last piece I'll say here, because in education, we often work in our own spaces, our own classrooms, we kind of can develop our own blinders. We get our ideas, we have our own beliefs or our own biases. We all do this, whether you're in education or not. But a part of design thinking, a concept of design thinking, is what we call the beginner's mindset. To try to approach situations, professional developments, out of classroom experiences, field trips, whatever, with the beginner's mindset of, ask lots of questions, in a way, take yourself out of try to put your own biases away and see things with new, fresh eyes. I love it as a way to praise students, even, the beginner's mindset. When a student writes a story or comes up with an idea, or they write it, they create something, you go like, wait, how'd you do that? Tell me about that. Really get in there and it's kind of a really great way to praise and celebrate students, but also you can learn something, right? We all have expertise, but I don't think any of us are really experts. There's always opportunity for everyone to learn something. And the beginner's mindset is a great thing to keep in mind wherever you are. And I think we've all been in professional developments where you go like, I don't need to hear this. I know it all. I've seen it. What's the point? But there's often always something, right? There's a nugget somewhere that's valuable. And a beginner's mindset helps you keep an eye out for that. And so if you're interested, we have a great explainer on how to do interviewing, not in really the professional sense, but in that ethnographic way of going and talking with people, getting to understand their situation and really empathize with them. So the next piece is understanding and defining complex problems. And this is one of my favorite quotes: a problem well stated is half solved. If you really know what your problem is, you're really already at an advantage. But that's not often the case. It takes time to really figure out what a problem might be in many situations. So, in a lot of cases, this is where we're at. You don't know what your problem is, and you don't know what your solution is. That's not a bad thing. It's actually a great thing to admit. To be like, I don't know. I don't know what's going on, and I need to figure some things out. And so you go and you talk to people, right? You look, you listen, you observe, you read about it, whatever it might be, and you try to figure things out. You talk to a lot of people, try to find your problem. Some cases, you do really know your problem now, like you've gathered lots of information. That's great, but you don't know what your solution is yet. That's fine. And I mean, the place we all want to be is here. You really know your problem and you really know your solution. You nailed it. It's working. The lesson you created was a home run. Students loved it. You're going to do it every year. The project you came up with is great. You're going to keep doing that. You're going to take it to scale, whatever it might be. But the thing you got to watch out for is here. And this happens, unfortunately, more often than I'd like to admit, is where you don't really know what the problem is, but you think you know what the solution is. And that's what we call the danger zone. That's where you're working off of incomplete data or, the latest fad assumptions. You didn't go talk to anybody, you didn't observe, and you're just kind of, or, stereotypes, old ideas, obsolete ideas, and you come up with something that's not going to work. You're going to implement something in the danger zone. And then when you do that, time and energy get wasted. An idea, sometimes ideas that are really good in other contexts, they don't work and people get mad. They get frustrated and an idea can become toxic. I've seen a lot of great pedagogical approaches in education used in poor context. And then people don't like them and they don't work. And that's a shame because there's a lot of great ideas, but if they're not used in the right context, they're not, you're going to lose folks. You're not going to meet outcomes. Your stakeholder support might vanish, right? I mean, I think we've all been in staff meetings where you launch a new initiative and you don't know what it is and it doesn't go well. And then 2 months in, everyone just kind of quietly stops doing it. That's the danger zone. People kind of passively resist when it's not working. That's what happens. You lose stakeholder support. And, the example I always give is when I was doing the after school program, I wanted to do this additive manufacturing piece with our middle school students. So we got one 3D printer for a group of like 20 kids in the group in the manufacturing group, and then realized later, like, they made all these great designs. They were super excited. They're really jazzed about the idea of like creating something from nothing. And then we went to print the first thing, and it took like 35 minutes for the first project. Like, I didn't understand my problem, and kids were mad. They were frustrated. They wanted to keep doing it. They're like, why is it going to take me 2 weeks to get this thing that I made? So I had a solution to a problem I didn't understand, and that does happen. So a good way to help identify challenges is a strategy called Rose, Thorn, Bud. This is probably our most versatile tool we use. It's super simple. You can use it with colored Post-its. You can do it online. You can use Padlet. You can use Google Jamboard, you name it. But it's very simple. Roses are positives, thorns are negatives, buds are green. They are potentials, opportunities. You can do this with pretty much anything. We've seen students do this for field trips, for situations in their community. They rose, thorn, bud, like what's good, what's bad, where could things change? But it's pretty much applicable anywhere. This is from a project a group did with first grade students a couple of years ago. We worked with, where students were looking at their cafeteria. First graders were not happy with their cafeteria situation, so they did a rose, thorn, bud. And you can see all these little pictures and a little bit of writing here, right? But first graders did it. They're like, yeah, I got ideas. I know things I'm not happy about, things I like in the cafeteria, things I could change. So you can use this pretty much anywhere. Rose, thorn, bud, if there's one design method you walk away with, I'd recommend using it. It's a great tool. And Sarah did a really nice video to explain that. We're not going to show it here, but we have links to these later. And in terms of using Rose, thorn, bud in the classroom, it's great for like an exit ticket. If you just wrapped up class, students can give you, give me one rose, one thorn, one bud for tomorrow. Like what's one thing you liked, one thing you didn't, what would be something I can change for tomorrow when we do the next lesson? It's really great because I think you can go on field trips. Sometimes we don't take enough time for students to reflect on their actual experience. You can use Rose, thorn, bud there. It's a nice way to get feedback from students. If you have an extended unit or project you want to be able to revamp for next year, real quick way you can have students do it. It's balanced and you can synthesize, you can visualize it, put up on the wall and look for patterns. If a bunch of students say like, oh, I didn't have enough time, you'll see a bunch of blue thorn Post-its. Okay, great. I have that feedback. I can go forward and I can make changes. And if anyone here does project-based learning, this is a really nice way to collaborate with students on determining challenges they might want to tackle, like a particular topic, to really do that together. So, you define these challenges. Sarah mentioned before, the value of brainstorming, but it can be difficult for students. Creativity, I don't think we take enough time to teach students the kind of creative thinking and creating that space for students to be creative, to come up with ideas and share ideas. So when it comes to brainstorming, we recommend a couple tips. Use parameters so that students are comfortable participating. Set ground rules, work silently sometimes. That's handy. This goes for students and adults. A space where they're not going to feel like they're being judged when they're putting their ideas out there. So doing some brainstorming silently when they're working together. Set time limits. Sometimes folks are uncomfortable sharing their ideas. So it's good for them to know, like, we're going to do this for 5 minutes and then we're done. So if you really hate it, it will be over. You can also use time limits as kind of set that constraint. You can use it as a competition, a timed activity, really push the urgency of coming up with lots of ideas. And as always, using tools like stickies, markers are great because students can put ideas up anonymously without anybody specifically judging their idea. That can be really helpful. And we've done this, making it a competition, right? You can gamify lots of brainstorming activities. This is one of our favorites, round robin brainstorming. You have students sitting at a table. There's a couple of variations on round robin where they can be passing Post-it notes around, putting Post-its in the middle on one idea. They can all have their own individual pieces of paper and rotating, building on each other's ideas. There's a version you can do where you share an idea and the next person gives feedback and then the next person builds on that. It's a great way to be inclusive. Every student participates, everybody has an idea. And you can really play around with that structure. This is one, as a piece of advice, I feel like this gets overlooked in terms of design quite a bit, but taking time to just look for inspiration. As educators, like we don't have to do it all ourselves, right? There's a lot of great work out there. Might be right in the classroom next door to you or the school down the road. It might be on Pinterest. It might be on, a Facebook group, whatever. But there is a lot of good ideas out there and you don't have to start from scratch. And I know I used to do that, rather than go talk to someone or go learn from someone else, I would try to like create everything from scratch, and we don't have to. There are a lot of different ways you can do that. Creating an inspiration board, which is basically what Pinterest is, right? Just gather all those ideas together, see what other folks are doing, ask some questions of other people and build on their ideas. There's no harm in that. And that's really the way design works. We are always want to be building on ideas that are already out there. Okay, so I'm gonna pause there. Sarah, how are you doing? Are you able to speak? Are you okay? You're good?
Yeah, we'll see how long I got.
Uh-oh. All right, very good. Sarah's going to talk about structures and consensus. Because you come up with a lot of ideas, you got to figure out which ones you want to go forward with, right?
Exactly. So putting structures in place in order to come to a consensus really helps to minimize the loudest voice in the room, because that always happens, right? It establishes an equitable way to get to a consensus by setting these structures in place. And it helps to put limits on, bias and power dynamics within a team. We've worked with teams where there's been everybody from, the teacher to the superintendent, and everybody has equal power within this team. And that's really important because whether we like it or not, we all work in certain types of power structures. So to have equal voice and to equitably build consensus is really important. And really what it does is it helps to reveal a team's preference and their opinions, right? Not just the preference and opinions of the loudest voice in the room. So a really great way to do that is actually through dot voting. And it's like super easy. You don't even have to use nice little different colored dots, but really you present a couple of different options, solutions that are given enough to the team that they have a clear understanding as to like what each of these are. And then you just ask them to vote. That's it. And they do so visually. You could have little markers, put little stickers on, whatever's the best thing. And then really what comes out is, well, which concept, which idea has the most votes? That's the one we're going to go with, right? And it's super easy for kids. It's super easy just for adults. It's really impactful. We do this in the office all the time. Like it's really quite nice. And what I would say is that it is always important to offer folks a couple of different concepts or a couple of different ideas, because you might also be able to do dot voting in terms of like, well, I like this one aspect of this idea, but I like the overall, reaching goal of this idea, right? So you can kind of do different types of voting. It just kind of depends on what you're looking for outcomes. So it is always very important to seek out feedback. And then this really gives you an opportunity to revise your approach. This is something we talk about all the time. We as humans live on the love time continuum, meaning the more time we spend on a thing, the more time of an opportunity we have to become attached to a particular idea. And really what happens is that when we ask for feedback early and often, it helps to reinforce the positive impact from seeking out and listening to others' thoughts and opinions, because that's important. So often our kids right now with our testing atmosphere, it's, oh, it's done. It's a checkoff, right? This is how a lot of school systems work. It's a checkoff. Have we done that? Cool. Okay, we're done. And in order to get feedback, and then to interpret that feedback and to try again, it's very important to put stipulations and expectations on what feedback should be kind, specific, and helpful. Erin and I were working with a group of kids once, and we had feedback given on Post-its, and a student wrote, maybe you should try harder next time. we had like a pause moment. We were like, hold on, let's talk about this piece of feedback, right? It's not specific, it's not helpful, and it certainly isn't kind. So starting that out early, keeping those expectations, modeling that is very important. Using statement starters, using time limit, again, setting expectations when needed. That also helps our students. I know that statement starters for me are really helpful. When I'm trying to give feedback, sometimes I'm like, I'm not really sure what to say, but if you give me a couple of sentences that kind of point me in the right direction, like that's going to be helpful, right? And it's also important to consider clarity from distance and anonymity. And really what that means, here's a perfect example. There's a great video out there called Austin's Butterfly. And we have Ron Berger, who is in charge of expeditionary learning. And he's talking with a bunch of kids about this student, Austin, his butterfly picture. And the kids are giving feedback to Austin. And then, okay, the feedback gets taken to Austin, who, by the way, is not there. And then Austin tries again, and he has another version of this butterfly. And so the feedback is anonymous. Austin doesn't know who's saying what. And there's distance because Austin isn't even in the room, right? So to be able to offer up an opportunity for anonymous feedback is also really important. So one of the greatest strategies, I think that this like blows my mind that this works so well, is when sometimes we're giving feedback, especially for students, right? They kind of need a perspective. So to use the thinking hats, each different color hat gives you a certain perspective which to use when you are giving feedback. So you could be, the yellow hat, which means you're the optimist. Everything is awesome. Here's all the strengths and reasons why this is so amazing. You could have, some students that like, well, that they're feelers. So you give them the red hat because they're going to tell you all the feels that they have about this one thing. So it's really a great way. It's also very versatile. You don't have to use all the hats. You could put, certain career roles or jobs associated with each hat. So if you've got kids working in teams and they each have different roles, well, what hat are you wearing today? This is a really great strategy. So as Erin said, we have a couple of different examples of districts using design thinking in action, really. So we've got two really great examples. Brownsville area actually had their library like revamped, and they wanted to make it into a future readiness center. So what they did is they brought a bunch of students together. They figured out who their stakeholders were. They used abstraction laddering, which is one of the videos that we'll give to you at the end of our webinar. And that actually helped them kind of identify exactly what their question was that they were trying to answer. They used rose, thorn, bud about like, what could we do with this library space? So they put all these different strategies together and others, and they came up with a really great idea of, using the masonry kids to build a fireplace. They had different stations for computers that students could come in and learn more about careers. So it was a totally re-envisioning of what their library space could be. One of our other schools had a team that basically rewrote their entire STEAM curriculum using students. Which was really great, right? They identified their stakeholders. They interviewed the kids that would be in this class. What did you want to learn? Again, rose, thorn, bud comes up. It's like a top notch. You can use rose, thorn, bud all the time for most things. And the students were able to, kind of help develop a curriculum that was then going to be implemented the following year.
Yeah, so we do have a training. It will be virtual this summer, but we are planning, we're starting to go back to doing some in-person training with schools. We have some things scheduled this fall as well. And we do tailor specific workshops to organizations or district needs as well, like I mentioned at the beginning. But this is a general training just to give an introduction. So it'll be 4 3-hour sessions. We'll be doing an hour on where we talk through some methods. You have about an hour off to explore and try some things out. We come back, we debrief, and we build each day with the idea that over the course of the 4 days, we encourage everyone to come with a specific challenge in mind and to continue over those 4 days to think about what methods, as you're learning them, what methods might apply to your specific challenge, so that when you leave the training, you have essentially a roughed out plan. As Sarah talked about those districts, thinking about what methods you're going to use and in what sequence, with what stakeholders, et cetera. We want everyone who walks away from the training to be able to have something drafted, at least to put into action. And it's open to individuals, it's open to, organization or district teams. It'll cover kind of, again, like what I think we would call the most powerful, most useful methods. As Sarah mentioned, there are literally hundreds of design methods. Some are more suited, I think, to the education learning space than others. And we'll try to cover the ones that are we see as most valuable. During that training, like I mentioned, we'll go over the basics of what is design. We'll dig deeper into human-centered design, the design cycle, make sure everyone really understands how those pieces fit together. You'll get a lot of practice, a lot of application, and we'll make sure we emphasize, linking things together, coming up with those method sets, something that fits for your needs. I'll drop this link in the chat. Even if you don't come to training, we're a nonprofit. We try to get things out to folks. We're not gatekeepers. We don't want to hold things back from folks. And we're passionate, Sarah and I, if you can't tell, we love design thinking. We think it's an incredible thing to use. It's a great tool. We have a bunch of explainer videos on YouTube for many different methods. That to give you step by step, like here's how to work with how to create a stakeholder map, step 1, step 2, step 3, etc. So we encourage anybody to check those out, even if you're not sure if design thinking is for you. Those videos are a great place to start, and they have many different applications that you can use. Also, there are a lot of great resources out there. These are 3 that we really love. If you want to do a little independent reading, it's a great resources for design thinking. IDEO has a lot of wonderful stuff for educators. So does the Stanford Design School. Also, if you're a member of the Carnegie Library, there's so many good books, so many. I highly recommend. There are a bunch. You search design thinking on the Carnegie Library System web catalog, and you'll get a bunch of great stuff. Can't recommend enough. And, as I mentioned, if you want to talk more, please reach out to us. We'd be happy to talk design thinking, give suggestions. If you have specific questions, like you said, if you want to dig into a more specific scenario you're thinking about, we're happy to chat, schedule a Zoom call, whatever it might be. We love it. We're passionate about it. We want folks to use it. So we're always happy to talk, truly. Yeah, so that's it. I mean, if there's any other questions, anybody wants to stick around, we'll be here. But appreciate you all for coming to our session today.